used my credit card to book the venue and then they didn't put my name on the invitation. Not a typo. Not an oversight. I found out 3 days before the wedding when my sister-in-law sent me a screenshot of the seating chart to ask if I'd be willing to float between tables since there wasn't an assigned seat for me. I stared at that message for a long time. My name wasn't on the chart at all. 240 guests, 12 tables, every cousin and coworker and college roommate my brother had ever mentioned, all accounted for. Me, the person who had wired $43,000 into his joint account 8 months earlier so he could have the wedding he always wanted. I was floating. I didn't respond right away. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and made myself a cup of coffee I didn't drink. My brother's name is Declan. He's 6 years older than me, and for most of my life, I thought that age gap meant something. That he was ahead, that he was wiser, that the way he treated me was just the natural order of things and I'd understand it better when I caught up. I'm 31 now. I've caught up, and I understand it completely. Growing up, our house had a specific kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of people being careful. My mother had her favorites, and she didn't try to hide it. Declan was the one she introduced first at parties. Declan was the one whose report cards went on the refrigerator. When I graduated summer from a school I'd gotten into on a full scholarship, she told her book club I'd done well for myself. When Declan passed his real estate licensing exam on the 3rd try, she threw him a dinner. I learned early that I was not the point of the family, I was the background. Useful sometimes, like furniture you stop seeing. I moved to Chicago at 24. Got a job in procurement at a mid-sized logistics company, worked my way into a senior analyst role, built something that was genuinely mine. I didn't call home every week. I sent birthday cards, showed up for Thanksgiving when I could, and kept a careful distance between the version of myself I'd built and the version of myself that still flinched when my mother said my brother's name in a certain tone. Declan called me in April of last year. He and his girlfriend, Marguerite, she goes by Margo, had been together for 4 years and were finally getting married. He was excited. He sounded like a kid. I was happy for him, genuinely, because Margo is one of those people who makes a room feel easier to breathe in, and I'd always thought she was too good for the way our family worked, but had never said so. He told me the venue they wanted, a restored barn property about an hour outside of Nashville. 200 guests, seated dinner, live band, the whole thing. He told me it was going to cost more than they had. I asked him how much more. He said they budgeted around $60,000, but the venue alone was $38, and with catering and florals and photography they were sitting closer to $90 before they'd bought a single piece of stationery. I told him I'd think about it. I shouldn't have said that. I should have said I couldn't help, wished him luck, and let him figure it out the way adults figure things out. But he was my brother, and it was his wedding, and I had the money sitting in an account I barely touched. And I thought I actually believed that doing something this big for someone changes things, that generosity lands, that it means something. I called him back 2 days later and told him I'd wire $43,000. I told him I wasn't calling it a loan. I just wanted him to have the wedding he wanted. He cried. I had never heard my brother cry before. He said I was the best thing that had ever happened to this family. He said he didn't know how he'd ever repay me. I told him he didn't have to. I wired the money. I got a confirmation text from him that said it's there, thank you, thank you, thank you, and a voice note from Margo that made me cry on my lunch break because she sounded so relieved and so genuine, and she kept saying, you didn't have to do this. You really didn't have to do this. You really didn't have to do this. Then 8 months passed. I wasn't involved in the planning. I didn't expect to be. It wasn't my wedding. I wasn't the maid of honor. I had no claim on the decisions. But I did expect to be kept in the loop. I expected to be treated like someone who existed. My mother was on every planning call. My Aunt Roseanne flew down to Nashville twice to help with florals. Margo's own family was spread across 3 states, and they were all more present in the logistics of this wedding than I was. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I hadn't given that money to be included. I told myself it was the right thing to do and I didn't need credit. I believed that right up until the seating chart screenshot. I sat with it for a day. Then I called Declan. He picked up on the second ring, which surprised me. He sounded distracted, the way he always does when he's in the middle of something he considers more important. I said, Margo sent me the seating chart. He said, oh yeah, isn't it great? Ruth Ann really came through on the table layout. I said, I'm not on it. There was a pause. Not a long one, not the kind of pause that means someone is processing something they feel bad about. It was the kind of pause that means someone is deciding how to handle you. He said, "We ran out of seats at the main tables. The venue has a capacity thing." "You know how it is," I said. "The venue holds 240 people. I know because I read the contract before I wired you $43,000. Another pause. He said, "We thought you'd understand. You're not really a party person." "I'm not really a party person." That was what he said. I had paid for his party and I was not really a party person, and so I would float. I would drift between tables full of people who were seated and fed and assigned, and I would do it because I would understand. I said, "I need you to explain to me what you mean." He said, "Mom thought it would be better this way. You know how you two are." She didn't want tension at the rehearsal dinner, and it became easier to not seat you. There it was. Our mother had decided at the table layout stage of her son's wedding, funded almost entirely by her daughter, that her daughter's presence would create tension. So the solution was not to address the tension. The solution was to erase me from the chart and hope I'd float quietly and not make it weird. I asked him if he agreed with her. He said, "She's our mom." I said, "Yeah, she is." I hung up. I sat down on the floor of my apartment. Not dramatically, not because my legs gave out, just because the couch was too far away and the floor was right there. And I opened my laptop and I pulled up my bank account and I looked at the transaction from 8 months ago. $43,000. Gone. For a wedding I wasn't seated at. For a family that had decided I was the kind of problem you work around rather than the kind of person you include. I had a thought then. It arrived very quietly, the way the most important thoughts do. I thought, the vendor contracts are in Declan's name, but I know the venue, I know the caterer, I know the florist, because Margo had sent me photos of the centerpiece samples back in October when she was still excited enough about the wedding to loop me in on things. I thought, I am still in contact with all of them. I didn't do anything that night. I made dinner. I watched something I can't remember. I slept. In the morning I woke up early, before my alarm, the way I always do when something is sitting on my chest. I made coffee that I actually drank this time. I opened my laptop again. I want to be honest here because I've thought about this a lot in the months since. I wasn't thinking clearly in the way that means rationally. I was thinking clearly in the way that means I had finally, for the first time in 31 years, stopped editing myself for the comfort of people who had never once edited themselves for mine. I emailed the venue coordinator. I introduced myself as the primary financial contributor to the event and asked for a brief call to discuss the final arrangements. She called me within the hour. I told her I was sorry to be reaching out so close to the date. I told her there had been a family situation and I needed to understand what the cancellation policy was for the reception portion of the contract. She walked me through it. 40% penalty if canceled within 2 weeks, which we were outside of by 4 days. We were at 17 days out. Within that window, they could release the date for rebooking and return 60% of the deposit to the primary cardholder. I asked who the primary cardholder was. She checked her records. She said my name. Because Declan had listed me as the financial guarantor when the booking was made, he'd needed my credit card information to hold the venue while the wire transfer processed, and I had given it to him without thinking twice, because he was my brother and I trusted him. And apparently in doing so I had retained more legal standing over that contract than anyone in my family had considered. I told the venue coordinator I'd call her back. I called the caterer next. Different situation. Declan had used his own card there, but I had emails from Margo asking for my input on the menu, which she had CC'd to the catering manager. I wasn't listed on that contract. I noted that and moved on. I called the florist. Margo had given them my email address as a secondary contact. Again, not the contract holder, so it was just the venue. But the venue was the linchpin. Without the venue was the linchpin. Or rather, there was a wedding, a ceremony, a marriage, all of which I had no interest in disrupting. Because Margo did not deserve that, and I actually liked Margo. But there was no reception, no barn, no seated dinner for 240 people, one of whom had been assigned to float. I thought about Margo for a long time before I did anything else. Then I called her. She picked up immediately, and her voice had that warm, slightly chaotic energy she always has, like she's in the middle of four things but is genuinely happy you called. I said, I need to tell you something and I need you to hear me out. She went quiet. I told her everything. The seating chart. The call with Declan. What our mother had apparently decided and what my brother had apparently agreed to. I told her about the venue contract. I told her I hadn't done anything yet, that I was calling her first, that I thought she deserved to know what was happening before I made any decisions. There was a long silence. Then she said, I didn't know. About the seating chart. I thought you were at table 4 with Declan's college friends. I said, I know. That's why I called you. She said, he told me you'd been told and you were okay with it. I said, I found out 3 days ago from the screenshot you sent me. Another silence. Longer this time. She said, I'm going to call you back. She called me back 40 minutes later. Her voice was different. Flatter. She said, he told me his mother thought it was better. He said you'd be fine floating. He said you wouldn't even notice. I said, Margo, I'm not trying to blow up your wedding. I want you to know that. She said, I know. Then she said, what are you going to do? I told her I was going to cancel the venue contract. I told her the 60% refund would come back to my card. I told her I was sorry that this was happening 3 weeks before her wedding, but that I could no longer participate in funding an event where I had been deliberately erased, and that I thought she deserved to know that before she found out another way. She didn't argue. She didn't beg me not to. She said, I understand. And then she said something I've thought about almost every day since. She said, I'm sorry, my future husband is a coward. I called the venue coordinator back and I canceled the contract. The refund was $25,800, which landed in my account 6 business days later. Declan called me 11 times that afternoon. I let all of them go to voicemail. My mother called twice. I let those go too. My mother left a voicemail that I listened to once. She said I was selfish. She said I had ruined everything. She said she didn't raise me to be this vindictive. I thought about the fact that she hadn't really raised me at all. Not in the ways that counted, and I deleted the message. Declan texted me 14 times. Some of them were angry. Some of them were pleading. One of them was just the words, please, don't do this, sent 3 times in a row. I read all of them and I did not respond to any of them. The wedding still happened. Margo and Declan got married in the ceremony that had already been paid for at a smaller venue they scrambled to book in the following 2 weeks, with a dinner for 60 people instead of 240 and a playlist from someone's phone instead of a live band. I know this because Margo texted me on the wedding day. She said we did it. It was actually kind of perfect. Thank you for telling me the truth. I sent her back a heart and I meant it. In the months that followed, my mother told everyone she could that I had sabotaged my brother's wedding out of jealousy, that I had always been difficult, that she didn't know where things had gone wrong with me. Several relatives called to weigh in and I thanked them for reaching out and told them I'd think about what they said, and I did not call them back. My brother reached out once about 4 months later. He sent a long message that was mostly about himself, how hard the last few months had been, how he'd had to rebuild trust with Margo, how he'd done a lot of thinking. Near the end, he said he knew he should have handled the seating thing differently. He did not apologize for what he'd agreed to. He did not mention our mother's role. He said he hoped we could eventually move forward. I read it twice. I noticed what was missing. I replied, I hope you're doing well, Declan. That was it. I think about the version of me from 2 years ago who would have apologized by now, who would have told herself that family is family and that she was being too hard on people who were just doing their best, who would have convinced herself that the discomfort of staying was better than the clarity of leaving, because at least staying was familiar. I don't miss that version of me. I don't. She was patient, and she was kind, and she gave $43,000 to people who decided she was the kind of person you don't seat at your table, and she deserved better than all of it. The money helped. Not because money is what this was about, but because getting some of it back meant I hadn't simply handed them everything and walked away with nothing. It meant that even at the end, when every decision had already been made without me, I still had one card left to play. I played it. It felt, for the first time in my adult life with my family, like choosing myself in a language they actually understood. I don't talk to my mother. I don't talk to Declan. I talk to Margo sometimes. Briefly, warmly, the way you stay in touch with someone you genuinely respect who is also navigating something complicated. She's doing well. She's figuring things out. I root for her. There are people in my life who think I went too far, who think the right thing would have been to show up, float between tables, smile at cousins I barely know, and file it away as one more thing I'd absorbed without consequence. They think that's the mature choice. They think swallowing things quietly is the same as being the bigger person. I used to think that too. I don't anymore. I know the difference now between forgiveness and erasure, between patience and self-abandonment, between being the bigger person and simply being the person who pays for everything and gets nothing, not even a seat. I have a seat now. I picked it myself, and I'm not floating for anyone. I used to think that being the dependable one was its own kind of reward, that showing up quietly, giving generously, not making a scene, that those things added up to something, respect maybe, or at least a seat at the table. What I learned is that they don't. Not automatically. Not with people who have already decided what role you play. I gave Declan $43,000 because I thought love worked that way, that you put something real into the world and it comes back to you changed, softened, more honest. What I got back was a seating chart with my name missing and a brother who told me with no particular shame that I wasn't really a party person. That's the thing about operating without integrity. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly removes your name and hopes you'll float. There's a version of the story where I show up anyway, where I smile at cousins I barely know and refill my own drink and tell myself that being the bigger person means absorbing one more thing. I've lived that version for most of my life. It doesn't make you bigger. It just makes you smaller in a way that's harder to see. What finally changed wasn't anger. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't rage or spite or some sudden decision to burn something down. It was clarity. The kind that arrives when you've been honest with yourself long enough to stop negotiating with people who aren't negotiating back. I looked at that transaction, $43,000, and I understood, maybe for the first time, that wisdom isn't just knowing the right thing to do. It's knowing when you've been patient long enough and having the courage to stop. I called Margo first because that was the right thing to do. That part matters to me. I didn't want to blow up her wedding. I wanted her to know the truth because she deserved it and because she was the only person in that entire situation who had actually treated me like a person. Doing the right thing even when it costs you something. That's not weakness. That's the clearest kind of strength I know. And then I made the call. I canceled the contract. I didn't yell. I didn't send a long message explaining myself to people who had never once tried to understand me. I just exercised the one right I still had, and I let the consequences land where they were always going to land. People will tell you that the high road means silence, that the mature thing is to absorb injustice with grace and move on. I disagree now. I think the high road sometimes means standing exactly where you are and refusing to disappear on someone else's schedule. Declan got a smaller wedding. My mother had to explain to her friends what happened. I got $25,000 back, and more than that, I got the feeling of having finally told the truth in a language my family understood. I don't know if Declan has become a better husband. I hope he has, for Margo's sake. I don't know if my mother will ever understand what she did, or if she even thinks she did anything. I've stopped waiting for that understanding. Some things don't resolve. They just clarify. What I know is this. I have never once regretted making that call. Not a single morning since. And that's not because I'm hard or cold or because I don't feel things. It's because I finally understood that resilience isn't about how much you can endure. It's about knowing exactly when to stop.